Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. We are excited to speak with you about how e-commerce sites can take advantage of some of the new next-generation web tools we've been working on at Google in order to build more effective websites. My name is Adam Greenberg, and I work on partnerships for mobile web technologies like Accelerated Mobile Pages, or AMP, and Progressive Web Apps, or PWA.
Hey there, I'm Rowan Merewood. I'm a developer advocate for the web and Chrome.
So by now we're on day 3 of I/O, and you've been hearing a lot about what Google is up to this week, from driverless cars to the Assistant to the latest on the Android platform. And the thread that really brings together this wide variety of products is connectivity. Google is in the connection business, whether that's someone asking for the latest scores to a baseball game, allowing you to message your friends, or using your voice to ask Google to play some music. And one of the most important things we do is connect people to goods and services that they want to buy, and connect businesses to a new customer base. Our goal here at Google is to bridge the gap between users who want to know something or find something and the companies that have the information they're looking for. And we do that via a variety of services, including some of the ones that you see listed right here. But our bread and butter really remains the open web, which is the greatest content discovery platform that's ever existed. Now, the open web doesn't only live in browsers or web views on a phone, but it also powers much of the content that drives services like search and the Assistant. So, why the web? Well, it's free, it's open, and anyone is welcome to come make their mark on the web. But most importantly, its reach is enormous. There are over 5 billion devices connected to the open web, and that number is growing at a steady rate. Now, in e-commerce specifically, there is a massive amount of business taking place online. The majority of user time spent on retail surfaces happens on the web, and that's both desktop and mobile. And in that web category, we all know that mobile is growing at a pretty steady rate. We also know that while we love apps at Google, not every user is going to download new apps in a given month. So if you're able to get a user to download your app, that's great. You should continue to focus on building the best experience for loyal users who have your app and working on a download strategy for your apps on Android and iOS. But the reality is, most new users are going to come in via the web, and you want to make that a killer experience for them so that they engage with your brand right away and that they want to come back again and again. And that ultimately may lead to them downloading your app. The web gives you an opportunity to reach a huge new user base, and that's why we love it for the commerce space. However, as great as the web is for facilitating an open dialogue and ensuring a level playing field exists for anyone who wants to publish content, and as great as it is at allowing brands to reach audiences they otherwise never could have, there are challenges that place the future of the open mobile web in an uncertain place. And the essence of that challenge is engagement and capabilities, which to date just have not been on par with the engagement and capabilities of apps. You get great, unparalleled reach with the web, but a lot of the time the engagement isn't where you'd like to see it. But that is changing. The tools that allow you to have great engagement on the mobile web exist, and over the next 30 minutes, we're going to talk to you about how you can build this technology into your web presence today. The ultimate goal here is to improve engagement on the web so that it meets or exceeds that of native apps, while still retaining that great reach that the web has. Now, in theory, this sounds great. Let's keep our fantastic reach. We'll add in a splash of staggering engagement. And in theory, it's a perfect world. But in practice, the web has a lot of issues, and it's a tall order to combat all these problems. Now, we're approaching the challenge head on, but there is a lot going on. And you can see a few examples here. Scrolling isn't responsive. Pages load slowly. Content bounces around when late images or ads pop in. And the web doesn't really work well offline or on flaky connections. And on top of that, while the technologies exist to improve the performance and engagement of websites, we have not always made it easy for developers to take advantage of these solutions, so they're not always put into practice. We know that at times these solutions can be complex, that they're changing a lot, so there's an awareness issue of what the latest best practices are. And overall, that makes it difficult to understand what the return on your development investment will be or what the ROI might be in terms of dollars. Today, we want to try to clear up some of that confusion. Because enabling some of these new web technologies can have a meaningful impact for your business. Poor performance has real-life consequences. As you can see here, over 50% of users will bounce from a site that takes more than 3 seconds to load, and 79% of them will abandon that site if they find it difficult to use. Now, in terms of revenue, we've seen that there is a 7% drop in total revenue for every 1 second delay a user faces. So it's a major issue. Users are often not finding what they want, either because a page didn't load or because the experience after load was less than stellar. And they're leaving sites sooner than they otherwise would have, which is a huge missed growth opportunity. Now, lost revenue that affects the growth of your business is obviously important, but it's not the only factor here. This slide runs through a bunch of experiences that bring stress to people. And they include waiting in line at a retail store, watching a melodramatic TV show, standing at the edge of a virtual cliff, watching a horror movie, and then experiencing mobile delays. So that is correct. Somehow, the level of stress caused by mobile delays was comparable, but slightly worse than watching a horror movie, and it's only surpassed by, of all things, solving a math problem, which is not an experience anyone wants to give to users of their site. So, you've got your business that is operating on tight margins to begin with, needing to capture every dollar it can. And you've got users who, when they come to your slow site, are in need of some serious zen. So how do we reduce stress? Meditation, massage. Mindfulness is great, but maybe a little difficult to impart on shoppers of your site. So we can focus instead here on what we can actually control, improving the overall performance, UX, and the general experience of visiting an e-commerce site to begin with.
OK, before we dive into that, though, we wanted to take a moment to clear up some of the terms involved, specifically AMP and PWA, because we've seen a little confusion here. Some people have been thinking that actually it's AMP versus PWA. And that's actually understandable. Both terms came about at the same sort of time. They're both web-related. And like Adam was saying, we throw new stuff at you all the time, so it can be hard to differentiate those. But let's clear that up. It's not AMP versus PWA, so these are not exclusive choices. These are complementary approaches when developing for the web. So it's not AMP versus PWA. It's AMP and PWA together. So let's take a little refresher on their relationship then.
OK, so let's start with AMP, or Accelerated Mobile Pages. AMP is an open source project that began a few years ago to help combat performance issues on the web. And there are two key aspects to this. First, AMP is a library of components built on top of HTML, specifically designed for performance. And second, the AMP format mandates a number of rules about its pages that are again focused on maintaining performance, but also on enabling caching. And this ability to cache and serve remotely is what enables platforms serving AMPs to pre-render them effectively. Now, if that's the technical aspect, the business benefit is that you can think of this as a team of 15 engineers devoted to managing performance and compatibility issues on your site, which leaves your own engineers free to focus directly on the features that you're working on. So the end result is that when you combine caching and pre-rendering, AMP content loads for a user on average in about half a second. Now, one additional piece of AMP to consider are some of the architectural choices you need to make when adopting the technology. The most widely used pattern at the moment is where you create a separate version of your page using AMP and link it as a related resource against your canonical HTML page, the same way you might maintain multiple translations. That linked version is what gets served on Google Search or via Twitter or Bing or any of the other platforms that link to AMP content. And while this provides an unobtrusive and incremental way to get into the platform, it does mean that you have two versions of your site. And that can introduce extra overhead. But like I said before, AMP is a framework of components. And if you can use those components to build a performant and effective web page, well, aren't those just the requirements for your web page anyway? If AMP is working for you as an entry point for some of your users, you might just want to think about using it as your front-end framework for all of your users. Now, this approach is gaining popularity, and a variety of sites have done it to date, including the global travel site Trip.com, which you can see here. They serve over 300 million users in 13 different languages, and they just launched a new site that is built entirely in AMP. OK, so if AMP is a concrete library and platform, then you can think of PWA as the overarching methodology behind all of this. And hopefully you've seen us mention these four pillars before. So I really want to try and cement this in your mind now. These are the things we really want you to consider when you're developing for the open web. So fast is up there, and that's a goal that we share with AMP. So performance really does need to be built in from the start. Next up is integrated. And integrated means a more app-like experience with your website. It should feel like it belongs on the device. That means it opens in its own window, or it can have icons on the home screen or the desktop. Then there's reliable. And that means that you can give me an intelligent experience regardless of my network connectivity state. So no more browser error pages. And finally, all of these build to create engaging experiences. So that means notifications when I need them.
content that I can trust just to display when I ask for it. And all of that is wrapped up in a UI that feels familiar and at home on my device.
So we've talked about what AMP is and what PWA is, and it's important to note that several different patterns exist for combining AMP and PWA or for just using one or the other, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But to start, here's your classic user journey funnel. And we're going to focus today on using AMP at the top of the funnel in the acquisition and browsing portion of a user's journey, and on PWA at the bottom of the funnel, when a user is looking to convert and when a business is then aiming to build them into a loyal customer through retention and re-engagement. Now, this is a bit of an oversimplification of the two concepts, but what I want to give you here is a way to frame these ideas in terms of where their strengths are going to give you the biggest ROI. So ideally, you'll be able to pick something out of this talk and say, that's what we're adding to our sprint when you get back to the office on Monday. So in broad terms, AMP gives you that easy development path for fast sites. That strength is going to give you the most value at the top of the funnel. As you progress through the funnel, the user is no longer browsing. They've made a decision, and your priorities are evolving. Here, you want those PWA pillars of integration and reliability to ensure that the conversion portion of the funnel provides the best experience possible, so you can build that one happy transaction into a repeat customer. So let's start with the first step in an e-commerce journey, which is the acquisition of a new user via entry points to your site. We'll tell you a little bit about what AMP looks like when put into practice and some of the success sites are seeing, and then we'll dive into some of the tech you can use to customize your pages. Now, what matters most here at the beginning is speed and performance. And this series of two GIFs shows why. On the left, you have the non-AMP version of a user finding a product on the website for B&H Photo and Video, which is one of the largest camera retailers in the world. And on the right, you have the AMP version. When properly implemented, the user on the AMP page is able to complete their transaction before the non-AMP user even gets to fully view the first page. So why is speed so important in this first discovery phase? Well, it's at this point where you're really differentiating yourself from the competition. If I'm looking for a particular brand of camera, then I'm looking through a list of suppliers, all selling the same or similar products. If I tap on one of those options and it doesn't load immediately, I might not wait around. I'm probably just going to go on to the next site. And so the reality is that most sites aren't that fast. If you have a super fast site upon load, it can really make you stand out. And we've already seen tons of sites do this in the commerce space. So you have 3 examples here from 3 top sites across the globe. And we just want to point out that when we say e-commerce here, we don't just mean retail. We're talking about travel and other transactable verticals as well. So the first example is from one of the largest retailers in Brazil, Magazine Luiza, who recently launched AMP versions of most of their product listing pages. We also have an example from Priceline, a global travel site that serves 1.5 million daily active users. And they just launched AMP versions for a bunch of their hotel pages for cities, states, and different countries. And they're working on growing that AMP presence to other types of content as well. And then finally, we see an example from Flipkart, the Indian travel brand who's no stranger to performance boosting, as they were the first site ever to launch a PWA. Now, when we talk about entry points, we want to make sure that people understand the point of entry is not limited to referrals from Google. There are over a dozen top platforms globally that will link to AMP pages. Some of them utilize a cache, and some don't. The fastest possible version of an AMP page will load when a cache is involved, but whether it is or not, AMP pages on these platforms do mean a faster experience for your content when users find it. Where a cache is involved, however, we see the truly instant version of AMP come into play. Google leverages a cache nearly everywhere it links to AMP pages, including in AdWords, which began to link to AMPs at the end of last year, and the early results so far have been pretty promising. As you can see here from the experience of the online retailer Merchology, AMP pages are faster, and that means an increase in conversions. Google's also working on a beta to bring the power of AMP to product listing ads, or PLAs, and we're excited to announce that 2 of the top landing page providers, Instapage and Unbounce, have both embraced the AMP format. Instapage launched full AMP support in their offering just last week. You can check it out. It's live. It looks great. And Unbounce is alpha testing AMP with a few of their clients before fully rolling out. Now, as far as results go overall, here are a few additional metrics that sites are seeing. E-commerce merchants like AliExpress, the global retail marketplace, and Overstock, online home goods store, are seeing increases in revenue and conversion following their deployment of AMP. And Twitter is seeing an overall reduction in page load abandonment for any AMP pages on its platform. Now, it's worth noting that AliExpress's example here is a mobile site built all in AMP. So they aren't using the paired approach that we were referencing a few minutes ago for the mobile version of their website. They do still have a separate desktop version. And given their strong implementation and the success they're seeing, we're going to use them as a reference implementation in some slides to come. So now that we've talked a little bit about how AMP leverages speed to drive an increase in important business metrics, let's dive into some of the technology that allows you to customize your amps and bridge together an AMP and a PWA. And for that, I'm going to hand it off to Rowan.
Oh, thank you, Adam. OK, so we've created our fast entry point, and that's grabbed our potential customers' interest. But there are still a few more steps before we can turn that into a purchase. When I land on a site, I don't come with an exact product in mind. I come with a problem that I want to solve. So maybe I'm thinking it's time to replace my old sofa, or perhaps I'm thinking of getting some shirts that aren't just black or gray. I'm not, but if I was, what I would need is a way of narrowing down that wider selection to the end product. So as Adam mentioned, we're going to take a look at AliExpress and what they're doing with their AMP content. So here you can see how they've done filtering and sorting. We can see the drop-down there that lets me sort by price, and we can see the sidebar coming out that lets me filter by color. So let's take a look at how we can create some of these components inside of AMP. Starting with filtering, you can see in this simplified example there are two main components. We've got the list of products that we want to display at the bottom, and we've got the controls to filter them at the top. So let's take a look at that AMP list tag first. The source attribute here is specifying a JSON endpoint that will return the data to populate our template. Now, that first source attribute is our default full list of products. The second source attribute is in square brackets, and that's because we're using the functionality of AMP bind here. The brackets tell us that we want to bind the value of the list source variable to the source attribute. And that means when list source changes, we're going to update our list. Now we need to provide some UI to actually allow the user to change that variable. So since AMP is still HTML, we can use our standard form controls here. And here we've got a radio button to toggle the color. You can see that I've populated the on attribute. This is AMP bind's convention for basically creating a sort of event listener. And I'm listening for the change event. When I get that, I'm going to update list source to include yellow if the option is checked. And that's it. If I select color in the form, that'll update the variable, and my list will reload. So let's generalize that pattern. What you do here is you set up your list with a dynamic source, and then you add form controls to update the source. And it's pretty simple. It's pretty flexible. So hopefully, to prove that, I'm going to show you a couple other applications of this. If we jump over to sorting, then, we've got the same list set up here at the bottom and the form at the top. The difference here is that instead of alternating the path on the Boolean variable that I had before, I'm just pulling out the event value and dropping that straight into our get parameter. So here, if we wanted to add a new sort option, like sort by rating, then all we have to do is support it on our endpoint, and then we just add that option into the form, and it's going to work. OK. And it's not just static form controls either. We can use the same functionality to take a value that the user types and pass that along to our backend. We can see here Airbnb experimenting with this to provide auto-suggest on destinations. So let's take a peek at the detail of this one. We're not making use of the change event here, because users may well be typing a bit faster than the service is returning in results. So instead, we're making use of the input debounced event. And that allows us to smooth that input out a little bit. So, and then it's the familiar pattern, right? User types their query, we drop it into the get parameter, we get the results. OK. Finally, then, the configuration of that list isn't always based on user input, but actually user context. So in this example from the aptly named ampbyexample.com, we're showing some geolocation. Now, behind the scenes, we're doing a geo-IP lookup on our server. So it's not precise location, but general user area. This is perfect for doing something like listing nearby stores for product collection. The touch I like here is the dummy items beforehand so that we can see something as the content is loading. And let's see how that's done. When that initial call goes off to the server, AMP list can display fallback content using the placeholder attribute. So down at the bottom, we're using that to show those dummy items. When our request comes back, we're replacing that with our populated template, but to the user, it kind of looks like a smooth transition in. And also, for a little bonus material, we recently announced AMP Geo, and so this lets you do geolocation at a country level, which can be useful for doing things like picking price formatting or delivery options. OK, so we'll take a little breather, because we've made it through the first stage of our funnel. And the one thing we really want you to take away from this section is that speed is key for acquisition. But that doesn't mean you need to sacrifice rich content as well. That simple pattern of amp bind with amp list can let you combine the speedy display of cached content with layering in of personalized data. OK, let's move on to conversion. That means we've built our fast entry point. I've found the product that I want, so let's go ahead and buy it. The step that I want to examine here, then, is add to cart. So we're going to stick with AliExpress, and we're going to see how they built this in-page experience using AMP. First, we're going to need a data structure to store the product that we want to add to our basket. Now, we've populated that with the data we know already. That's the country name, the price formatting, the quantity, and we have these null placeholders, which are for the additional options we're going to configure in the page. We're going to use amp bind again to fill in those placeholders. When the user taps on a size, we're grabbing that value, and we're mapping it into our data structure. We're also mapping it back to an element on the screen, so the user has some visual feedback that something has happened. And we're going to use amp bind as well to map those product properties into the hidden inputs of our add to cart form. And finally, the additional ingredient here is the action XHR attribute, which again is AMP's convention for allowing the in-page form request. So now, when the response comes back, we can update the page, and we can trigger our confirmation message. OK, so we've done add to cart with in-page interactions in AMP. And that means we've set a high bar for speed. But what happens when I make the transition off of AMP? If we just present the user with a slow spinner, then we're burning all of that goodwill that we built up in the first stage. Now, instead, while we know we're making a transition, maybe from cached to hosted, from AMP to the wider PWA world, we don't want the user to know it. We want this to feel like a seamless, consistent progression. Conveniently, that's a perfect segue into a core concept for progressive web apps, the service worker. Now, a service worker can act like a caching proxy server between your app and the network. And that means that we can go ahead and we can warm up that cache before the user even gets there. In our AMP content, we make use of the AMP install service worker tag to start this process. We're providing both the service worker location and an iframe on our domain, because the service worker can only be installed from our domain. Once the install starts, we're ready to start prepping that content. I'm going to show you a super simple base here. And so in here, what we're doing is during the install step, we're caching what I like to call the site furniture. So that's stuff like your fonts, your header images, and so on. And then we have a fetch handler. So when the user taps to go to the new page, the fetch handler kicks in and starts serving our cached content. And this is just a very tip of what you can do. So I highly recommend checking out our workbox library to get some production patterns that you can make use of here. OK, we've focused a lot on the fast pillar from our principle. And that's fine, but it's not the whole story. Caching can solve some of these problems for browsing, but not for state changes like add to cart. And we don't want the user dropping out at this critical stage just because our connection dropped. Now, this was the problem that one of the real pioneers of commerce on the web set out to solve. And eBay, as most of you probably know, is the online marketplace where you can find 1.1 billion listings, and they saw over $23 billion of transactions just in the first quarter of this year alone. So reliability is absolutely core to that experience for them. And they've been working to enable their add to cart button to work offline. Now, I really love this use case because it's not about trying to make the entire site work offline or do some kind of crazy user experience. They picked a critical part of their user journey, and they focused on making that reliable, solving a real business problem. And that's the key. Don't think of offline and online as binary states. Instead, we should be thinking about robust, network-independent add to cart. It's just that's not as catchy for putting on a slide. So really what happens here is that eBay simplifies the shopping experience. I don't have to consider my cell phone signal when I press that button. All I know is I want a new phone, I press the button, eBay takes care of the rest. Let's look at how we can do that. First, our default behavior. If I tap add to cart, but the connection isn't there, the request just fails and drops out. So what do we need to do? Instead, when that request fails, we're going to capture the details that we need to send it again and save them. When we reconnect, we retrieve that data, recreate our request, and we send it. Simple enough concept, so let's dive into a little code. First, I'm going to go back to my fetch handler again. And what I'm doing is I'm intercepting those add to cart post requests. Always be specific when you're doing something like this, because you don't want unintended side effects by interfering with other requests from your app. Next, we fire off that request. If it succeeds, great. We've got nothing else to do. However, if it fails, we want to pull out the request details. I've cloned the request here because the body has already been read, and you can only read it once. I'm using the local forage library just to give me a simple key value store, and the current timestamp is my key, and I'm saving the request body. Now, we've saved our request. We want the matching functionality to retrieve it as well. In this function, back in my client logic, I'm iterating through the existing entries, and I'm using the timestamp just to filter out the ones from the last 10 minutes, because I don't really want to randomly add stuff to the user's cart hours later. I'm using that saved data to just build a new post request for the same add to cart action and send it. And finally, I've attached this function to listen for the online event in the browser, and that means when the page registers as online again, it will kick in and attempt to send all of those requests. But you should also be hooking this up in some other places as well, like page load or service worker activation. And for a bit more bonus content as well, go and take a look at the background sync API for what you might be able to do with this in the future. OK, very briefly then, because we've worked hard to get the user this far, we should probably take some money from them. That said, Adam and I have already crammed way too much content into this talk, so we just wanted to give a shout out to some of the other talks that are doing this. So in fact, directly after this, on stage 7, there's a Google Pay best practices talk if you want to keep the e-commerce theme going. And with that, we're on to the home straight. Let's take a look at what we can do after the sale to try and turn this person into a repeat customer. Now, to have repeat customers, they're going to need to have a way of actually getting back to us. And add to home screen is a way to do this that is super easy to implement. But it's not always relevant. The home screen is for daily quick access, and if you're someone like an airline or a furniture company, then success for you is not measured in daily active users. Like, your purchase patterns are seasonal or periodic. So what if you could give me something personal instead? Let's say I've ordered that new sofa. On the order confirmation page, you could give me an option to track my order. When I tap that, I'll be prompted to add the order to my home screen. So let's take a look at how we can make that happen. On the confirmation page, we're linking to the manifest. But in this case, it's not a static file. It's a dynamic resource. And we're going to populate it with a custom name, an image, a start URL, and so on. And we also don't want to just randomly trigger this add to home screen prompt. We only want to do it in response to the user pressing the button. So this is something you should actually add on all of your pages to ensure that you're intercepting the add to home screen event. We capture the before install prompt event and prevent it from showing, and then we re-trigger it for the click listener for our track order button. And that's it. Now I've got the order right there on my home screen, and it's not the home page of the furniture site. It's going to the current status of my order. The benefit here is when my order is done, you can maybe just show me a message saying that it's fine for me to delete the icon now, or you can maybe show me some additional products, and perhaps I should get that matching coffee table as well. Anyway, if you do this, you need a way of measuring its success, and there are 3 places you should be checking. First, let's revisit where we're triggering that prompt. And it's not just fire and forget here. We can expand the result of the prompt. In this case, I'm firing a Google Analytics event for the installed and dismissed events. Next up, you can use a unique location for your start URL that will only be used by your manifest. Here again, I've just added some Google Analytics campaign parameters onto the end of my URL. And for our final signal, we're going to make use of this display standalone property, and that's what's causing our app to launch in its own window without any of the browser controls. And it turns out, this property can be matched with a CSS media query. So here, we're using match media to detect standalone mode and trigger another analytics event. This is important because users may deep link into our web app, meaning they aren't triggering a launch from the home screen. And there we go. With these 3 signals, you're now measuring installs, launches, and usage for your app. OK, since I mentioned other routes into your app, I'd like to finish with a little message about notifications. I'm not going to show code here because that's actually the easy part. Potentially, it's even too easy, because I keep hitting sites that as soon as you land on the domain, ask you for the notification permission. And this is spammy behavior, which hurts the ecosystem. And when I say hurts the ecosystem, I mean it hurts you as developers, because we start making it harder to use these features. So I want to be able to get useful push notifications, and to do that, it means I need all of you to really champion the best practices here. So I want you to make sure that every notification you send satisfies these three things. Who? It should be personal information to me, like it's my delivery, or it's a sale on an item that I'm watching. And then what, as in what has actually happened. If you can give me everything I need concisely in the notification, I may not even need to tap it. And when, and that means sending them at appropriate times and expiring them when they're no longer needed. So what does that look like when you pull it all together? Looks something like this. It's personal to me, it's giving me enough information to act without tapping, and that 5-minute warning was worth interrupting me. So if that's the case, I better head over there so I can relax on my new sofa, and I'll hand it back over to Adam.
Thanks, Rowan. Excuse me. OK, so using a service worker and building a PWA can mean an uptick in business metrics, just like we saw earlier with AMP. And Starbucks, for example, launched a PWA last year, and they've seen their daily and monthly active users in this format double. So that's the full funnel, going from acquisition via super fast entry pages using AMP to converting and retaining users via PWA. We've talked a lot about how these technologies work separately, but we also want to highlight that they can work together, and there are a couple of different patterns to do so. Because after all, in the case of both AMP and PWA, we're just talking about web pages. The two technologies are complementary ways of achieving different goals, each with their own strengths and each with their own challenges. But when they're combined, you get to enjoy the benefits of both. AMP and PWA give you a feature-rich experience that starts fast and stays fast. So the first example here is 1-800-Flowers, which delivers flowers and gifts to over 150 different countries across the globe. They're linking AMP pages, which serve as an entry point into their site, into a PWA. Within that PWA, they are also leveraging Google Sign-On as an identity solution, and they're allowing users to check out via Google Pay. It's a great example of not only utilizing AMP and PWA together, but several different pieces of the mobile web toolkit. And in early testing, 1-800-Flowers saw a 50% conversion increase with their PWA. Now, ShopGlues, a leading e-commerce player in India with a marketplace for tier 2, 3, and 4 cities, also launched an AMP and PWA integration last year. And similar to 1-800-Flowers, AMP pages are serving as entry points to their site, and they then link into a PWA. And the framework helped them see an increase in conversions, a reduction in load time, and a reduction in bounce rate. Now, the pattern of linking your amps into a PWA isn't the only solution. There's another pattern for combining AMP and PWA that is beginning to emerge, where you use the two together in the same document. When a user visits such a page through an AMP cache, they get the AMP page. When they continue their journey onto the site origin, they get the full AMP and PWA experience, including the speed and turnkey UX of AMP and the extended capabilities of PWA. Now, the simplest first step to do this is the one we showed earlier, which is just to add a service worker with basic caching to an existing AMP page. From there, you can layer on other PWA features as you like, including push notifications, more advanced caching and offline support, and an add to home screen prompt. An alternate pattern is to build your PWA to be a kind of app shell for your AMP documents, which themselves function as content pages. This pattern can be a little more complex, and it might require a little bit more work to make it work, but we have seen some sites do so, including Carve.com, which is an online retailer that makes phone cases, as well as the global car brand BMW. And one benefit of either pattern, on top of speed and performance gains, is that they simply build upon any investment you've already made with AMP, so you can reuse that work. All right, so that is about it. Now, we've learned a few things today. How to start fast with your AMP pages and stay fast with your PWA, so that you can successfully combine the entry points of AMP with the down funnel engagement tools of a PWA. We talked about how to customize AMP pages and how to send notifications via the web to your users. We talked about Service Worker and AMP's custom library, and we talked about companies who are seeing success with each of these formats, as well as some seeing success by combining the formats together. The bottom line is, we know the web has amazing reach, and the tools now exist to help ensure its capabilities mean the web has great engagement and profitability as well. Now, you can check out technical documentation on our websites, or feel free to stick around after the talk to ask questions Rowan and I will be here, and then we'll be in the mobile web sandbox later. But we can't wait to see what you build. Thank you.